While there are some legitimate concerns about how Utah's medical cannabis law has ended up, in a number of ways, there's actually some significant improvements over where it was drafted for Proposition 2 that voters passed in 2018. This 2020 session, where the latest bill is being introduced, is no different. There are a number of improvements to the program that we've been working on and building consensus for, and that are going to be reflected in this bill. The bill actually has dozens of little changes and things to try and streamline and improve the program. But in this video, I want to take you through 5 of the key changes that are in the 2020 Medical Cannabis Bill. Perhaps one of the most controversial items in the negotiated bill was the blister packs, this idea of storing individual cannabis flowers in these plastic pouches like your allergy medication or certain types of gum. That was how cannabis flower was saved. There were a number of people who wanted to completely get rid of the cannabis flower. And so this idea was actually proposed to us. It was not our own proposal, but we took it into the negotiations, and that was enough to save the flower in the negotiations. But they were designed to address 2 issues, and that's what I want to explain, because that's what we're preserving and how we're moving forward to get rid of blister packs. The first was that the concern is that flowers come in different sizes, so how does a patient know how much they're getting? And if this whole idea is we want it to be medicine-like and dosed and so forth, you have to have consistent sizes. So requiring each little blister pack pouch to be in a consistent size would facilitate that. The second idea was law enforcement was concerned that if you just have a bag of flour or a glass jar, how would law enforcement know if that was flour that you purchased from a dispensary versus that you got on the street? So they had that concern, and they didn't want someone to have this magical glass jar that they just forever got street weed in and had legal protections. And so the idea was a blister pack with poppable pouches and so forth would allow them to do that. What we've been able to build consensus for, and what will be reflected in this 2020 bill, is moving away from blister packs, but still addressing those 2 things. So patients will be able to obtain their raw cannabis flower in a glass jar, in a plastic bottle, for example. Those will have to be contained in a child-proof bag or pouch that's opaque when you go away from the medical cannabis pharmacy. However, in the home, you can just then store it in the bottle or the jar. But the way it's going to work is that the jar will have a label on it saying the date of purchase. And so you will be able to have legal protections for the flower inside of that jar for up to 60 days when you're outside of your home. At the end of 60 days, that jar loses its legal protection, and so any flower found in there would be considered illegal marijuana. That helps law enforcement be able to distinguish so that this magical glass jar does not forever give legal coverage to whatever a person might put into that jar. In addition, the flowers will still have to have consistent weights, which isn't that big of a deal, and some patients have expressed an inclination that that's an okay thing. All in all, that's a decent trade-off to move away from blister packs, the added cost that they would introduce to the program, the hassle. Obviously, there's been a lot of complaints about that particular aspect, and so now we're moving away from that, still addressing some of the issues, but making this easier for patients to obtain their raw cannabis medicine. Now that voters in the legislature have endorsed medical cannabis legally, the question becomes of what about everyone before Proposition 2 who, yes, nevertheless broke the law, but they had a valid medicinal need. Now that we consider this medicine, can we do anything for those people who elected to break the law and take the consequences, but were doing so because of a medical necessity that is now legal? So this is a process called expungement, and so what's being discussed in the 2020 bill is the ability to retroactively legalize or decriminalize this medical cannabis for patients. So, for example, if you used cannabis before November 2018 for a medicinal need that you can substantiate, you can show the medical records, the doctor's support, you were using cannabis in the appropriate format, then you would be able to qualify and have that crime expunged from your record. This is a huge deal for a lot of people because there were a number of patients, we shared their stories on the campaign trail for Proposition 2, who knew the legal ramifications but were deciding to just break the law anyways because they wanted the medicinal benefit of cannabis. And that was worth the calculus to them of risking law enforcement, and some did get arrested or cited. So this is going to be a huge help for a lot of people that we're really excited about. Utah law prohibits someone from operating a vehicle if they have any drug metabolite in their body at all, including the cannabis metabolite. As most of you probably know, the cannabis metabolite actually can linger in your body for weeks after use. So right now I can go to Colorado, I can legally use recreational marijuana. 2 weeks later I can be back in Utah, get pulled over, have my blood taken for some suspected reason of impairment. I'm not impaired, but hey, look, Connor has the cannabis metabolite. Well, I'm not impaired at all. It's just lingering in the fatty tissue. When you ingest cannabis, as your body begins to metabolize it, the tetrahydrocannabinol metabolizes down into different components. And initially, yes, it is an active metabolite. It has the potential to impair you. That's what gives you the high from THC. However, your body then metabolizes it down within just a few hours or less, and turns it into an inactive metabolite. And these inactive metabolites show up on drug tests. That's what these drug tests find, but they're not impairing you. And so that's a problem if we're punishing people for a metabolite that isn't actively causing any problem. So in the 2020 bill, we're looking to change the metabolite law to say that for cannabis, it has to be a pharmacologically active metabolite. This is going to be a huge help for a lot of people who find themselves running into the law because they were driving not impaired, but blood, saliva, whatever's taken, the metabolite is found, but they weren't impaired. There were no risk to the public. And so this is a good public safety decision. It's still remaining focused on people who are potentially being impaired by the cannabis metabolite, but it carves out all the people who are not a public safety risk and who shouldn't be criminalized. So this is a big win for patients. Over the months, we've been sharing cases where individuals who are using legal CBD, not just medical cannabis patients, but anyone, using CBD fail a drug test. And that's a problem because while scientifically CBD is just straight CBD, it's cannabidiol, it's not THC, it won't impair you, the legal definition of CBD means 0.3% THC or less. So legally, you can have a CBD product that's legal at retail sale. You can get it at Whole Foods, you can get it at Good Earth or wherever, but it can have a trace amount of THC. What that means is that with enough use of that CBD product, depending on your body's composition, you can actually have enough THC stored up, or the metabolite of THC stored up in your body, that if you were to take a drug test, for example, you could fail. And some people do, and that's a problem. They're getting busted for THC even though they're legally using CBD. So the 2020 bill is looking to address that issue and make sure that if someone is going to be punished for a failed drug test, but they say, hey, look, all I was using is CBD, the government has to overcome that defense. There's kind of a rebuttable presumption, or in other words, the government has to have evidence that the person actually was ingesting THC. Showing receipts from another dispensary or a bong or, you know, a half-used joint or whatever. They have to have some kind of evidence, because if a person says, well, here's my bottle of CBD pills that I was using, the government then has to show that they were in fact using something with THC. So we're looking to level the playing field and give some legal protections to people who are using legal CBD products so that they don't run into these legal challenges for having a trace amount of THC in their system. The final key change that we'll share in this video deals with reciprocity. Now, the bill is not going to create a full scheme for open reciprocity, but what we're looking to do is establish a route whereby a patient in another state can have an opportunity to buy their medicine, their medical cannabis, in one of Utah's dispensaries or medical cannabis pharmacies. For example, let's say my aunt lives in a state where medical cannabis is legal. She has a card, she has a qualifying condition under Utah law as well. Let's say it's seizures, epilepsy. Let's say my aunt is visiting me for an extended period of time. Maybe she's thinking about moving here. Maybe she's here to help my wife with a new baby. She doesn't want to transport a bunch of her medicine across state lines, which is federally illegal. She doesn't want to fly with it. She needs medicine still. And so the idea is that people in those cases would have the ability to come into Utah's medical cannabis pharmacies and establish that they are a patient in another state. They have one of Utah's qualifying conditions on the list, and thereby have a once-a-year opportunity for a 45-day window to be able to come in and buy their medical cannabis medicine in Utah. So this is a limited reciprocity to kind of open the door for these cases, which there are many, And we want to make sure that there's a path whereby these out-of-state people, we want to welcome them to the state and make sure that they can get their medicine here in one of the formats that Utah has approved so that they don't have to risk bringing something across state lines. So those are 5 of the key changes that will be made in the 2020 bill. We've been working on this for a number of months with different stakeholders to build consensus, to address problems, and make sure that this program succeeds and works for patients, gets off the ground, and does what we all aimed for it to do. So I hope that you guys can support the bill, talk to your legislators about supporting the bill as we continue to make improvements to the medical cannabis program. As always, we're open to your input, and if you have other ideas for what needs to change, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, directly on our website, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. We're eager to get your input and keep improving the program. For now, that's a wrap, and that's what we're looking forward to with medical cannabis in the 2020 session.